Welcome,
Yep.
everybody. Thanks for joining. This is the last talk of the year, and it's been such a exciting year, 2022. Who would have thought? And 12 months just went by, and what would be better just to cap it with Tamir's. So today, Tamir is going to talk about J&J. He is the director at JJDC, talking about investments, what are the thinking, the perspective of J&J, which I think many of you will find it really interesting and relevant. And as we all know, a lot of the company wants to partner with J&J and maybe hopefully have J&J invest or even acquire. I think that's one of the things that it's good to have good understanding about what they are looking for, what they're interested in, and how they think about certain things. So that's why Tamir is here to tell us everything about it. And so Tamir has over a decade experience in venture capital investment, and he has been working at J&J for 9 years. And he has been working in areas in the medical devices, consumer and health technology investment. And he's involved in the deal sourcing, the due diligence, the negotiation, the structuring, all the things that involve in bringing technology as part of the J&J. And so, as you might have heard earlier, he just moved here to California. And so if you happen to be in the Bay Area and run into him, say hello and give him a lot of good tips so that he can eat. He bring his kids somewhere outside IHOP. So, but with that, Tamir, the floor is yours. And one more thing before I let Tamir speak is that if you can ask your question on the Q&A section along the way, because we will answer your question along the way. So don't wait until the end, because that's, we might not remember.
Yeah, and I'll try and run through the slides fairly quickly so we have enough time for Q&A. It's about 20 slides and we could probably do them fairly quickly. But please stop me along the way. We try to figure out the technical way to get my slides on the screen so I'll see the Q&A live, but I have not managed to do that. So I'll try and get it done, but if I don't, please excuse me, and we'll take a pause for questions every once in a while. So can you see my screen okay, Christine?
Yeah. I can see your screen. You want to do there you go. Perfect. I think there you go. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining, and hope everybody has a nice afternoon. Weather is iffy today and it's supposed to rain, but hopefully it gets better down the road. I maybe would start with a quick introduction of myself. I usually have this really funny and comical who I am and how I got here type of slide, but it's not sort of J&J format, so I'm trying to be a good boy. So I've born and raised in Israel, as some of you know, father of two, Eitan and Ella, 6 and 4. As Christine mentioned, moved to Foster City, California, October of 21. So been with J&J 9+ years out of Israel, covering our Israel and European activities across all sectors in Israel, but covering also med device and consumer in Europe. By background, I'm a biomedical engineer and a physical chemist, as well as a paramedic by training from my Israeli military days, and then did an MBA later in my career. That sort of quick background on me. So for those who don't know J&J in general, we our previous CEO and chairman as of recently, Alex Gorski, liked to describe J&J as a 130-something-year-old startup. So as you'll see, we've been formed around the Civil War days. So really around wound closure activities initially, but then created this big behemoth that is J&J across med device, farm, and consumer. But I think the thing that we should probably consider that J&J always had this, pioneer spirit on bringing new products to market and creating new avenues to help patients and people live a better life in that regard. And I think a lot of what we see across all sectors, farm, medical device, or consumer, is we are very scientifically biased. So even in consumer products like OTC drugs and creams and everything, whenever we used to evaluate technologies or new assets, there had to be a scientific backing to back that claim. So we use science to really change the trajectory of health for a lot of people. For those who don't know, J&J in the general sense of things, we are the largest healthcare company in the world. Unfortunately, this is only 2021 results. I don't have the 2022 results yet, but we'll probably get them in the course of January. We're over 90 billion in revenues year on year. 21 was a pretty successful year from an increase of revenues and earnings per share. And generally, J&J stock is a very steady, well-regarded stock, usually in the Fortune 10 actually, and almost included in every ETF you can think of. And for good reason, because it's been very, very stable and very successful over the years. I always tell the story that when I joined J&J, I think the stock was at around $80+ per share, and now it's like 100 and almost 180. So I don't take credit for it by any means, but it's very, very steady and it's an increase. And just a breakdown of the sectors that we're operating in. So consumer, which is probably the way people know J&J the most, is actually the smallest operating company within J&J, but it still accounts for about $14 to $15 billion in sales every year. And some of the brands are well known to you, Band-Aids and Neutrogenas and Aveeno's. That group will be spinning out of J&J next year in January of 23. That is when the official spin out happens. This will be a new publicly traded company called Kenvue that was also announced earlier in the year. They will still operate under the J&J umbrella for a few months or years, but they will be somewhat independent in that regard. Our biggest operating unit is our pharmaceuticals group, which has quite a lot of therapeutic areas under its belt: oncology, immunology, neuroscience, cardiovascular, metabolic, infectious diseases, and fairly active, one of the largest in the world as well, and driving a lot of the growth of J&J in general. And the last but not least, and obviously the area I'm focused on, which is med devices, which a lot of you know fairly well, including our Ethicon, surgical vision, our contact lens business, Biosense Webster, our CSS business, our cardiovascular specialty solutions business, as well as our orthopedics business, which is number 1 to 2, depending on which category in the world, which account for anywhere between 25 and 30 billion sales a year. And very general numbers, we are one of the heaviest investors in R&D in the world from companies that are not tech companies like Google or Apple, and we invest upwards of 14 billion a year, give or take, in R&D, and that number has been increasing year on year, probably since I've been at J&J, but probably even before that. We're active in almost every country in the world, from a med device, farm, and consumer products. You can find our products really everywhere, I think, both in the hospital, in the supermarket, in the pharmacies, and others. And I think the number that we're getting is more than 1 billion people use our products every day worldwide, which is quite a nice outreach. I'm part of a group called JJDC, which is one part of a broader group called J&J Innovation, which was formed around 2013 with the purpose of being an externally focused group within J&J and trying to find the right technologies, entrepreneurs, and companies that are of strategic interest to us and try and partner with them so we can not just bring value to patients and physicians, but also to J&J by doing partnerships, investments, incubation, and late-stage deals in the form of licensing agreements, acquisitions, divestitures, and others, all in the hope to end up bringing this into J&J in one way or the other. So I'm going to cover each and every one of those buckets fairly quickly, but obviously focusing more and more on the JGC front, which is where I'm at, the corporate venture group of J&J. And then try and sort of bucket it all together into the sort of spectrum of activities that we offer to startups and entrepreneurs. So if you look at the innovation teams and the innovation centers, so we have 4 of those worldwide, and I'll go from east to west. So we have one in Shanghai covering Asia Pacific. We have one in London covering Europe and Israel, one in Boston covering our East Coast, which is anything east of the Mississippi, and one here in South San Francisco covering the West Coast, including Australia, which I always say east enough to be considered West Coast, which is anything west of the Mississippi from a stateside perspective. Each and every one of those have scientific experts. So if, I've mentioned the therapeutic areas on our farm group. So there is an immunology expert, there's a neuroscience expert in each of those innovation centers. And normally these would be fairly small offices. So you would think 20 to 30 people. And the entire purpose is to really be ingrained in the ecosystem, the geographical ecosystem that this is overseeing, with the hope of being able to do mainly early stage deals by being on the ground and being able to evaluate a lot of those projects and products and technologies from a technical scientific perspective, rather than necessarily rely on opco experts that sit in, any either our area of the world, requiring a ton of travel and resource management. And having also transaction people in those innovation centers to enable, a quicker process, an easier process, a more streamlined process to get things done in a more efficient manner. And I'm actually sitting in that innovation center. So in all of those innovation centers, you'd likely see JGDC people as well. We sometimes partner with those scientific experts, with those transactions people. We are part of a broader team together, but we also partner in a lot of opportunities as well. Over the years, they have executed more than 850 collaborations. I think the number actually is probably closer to 1,000 today. That's from the beginning of the year. And as you'll see, more than 5 billion in venture capital and collaboration money since the beginning of the Innovation Center. So it's been a big driver of innovation into the J&J organization, but also into those ecosystems as well. The second bucket of our innovation group is our JLabs facilities. So there are 13 or actually 14 of those, I think, worldwide. The majority of them are in North America. We do have one in Shanghai. We do have one in Beerse in Belgium next to our Janssen campus. And then in the States, we have some partner sites in Boston and other areas, but also wholly owned JLab sites in New York City, in Toronto, in South San Francisco here, in La Jolla, and in Houston at TMC. And I think the nice thing about JLabs, or at least the way it started, is it's a very no strings attached model, in the sense that if you think about it, you come in as a company, you pay rent, and usually that rent is somewhat reduced from the normal average rate you would get in a specific biotech hub or medtech hub. And you could decide which type of space you want. So if you want a lab, you could get a lab. If you need just a desk, you get just a desk. And obviously the rate would depend on what you're asking for. But being part of the JLabs ecosystem not only enables you to be a part of, an ecosystem of companies, you're also enjoying the benefit of being close to J&J should you want to be close to J&J, right? So you can be associated what we call a JPAL, who is usually a subject matter expert or a domain expert in a specific field from J&J to help guide, help support. By no means we are forcing this. This is completely at the liberty of the company to decide they want to. And we get no equity of those companies. So it's a fairly break-even model where companies come in, they pay rent. We normally get the real estate from a local government or a municipality. We provide all the equipment, a very small headcount of labs manager, site manager, comms expert. And the business is basically break even. And over the years, there's been, I think that the number today is more than 900 companies across all JLabs sites coming in and out. And I think the way folks should be looking at it is really, this is an effort to really build an ecosystem and help the ecosystem grow, rather than necessarily provide a specific value for J&J. I will say that, in the selection committee over the last few years, there's been a bit more focus on selecting companies that could be of strategic interest to J&J, but still in that regard, we're not asking for any rights. The one other important number to note here is about a third of those are female-led companies, and also another third is about minority-led, which is a very important thing to call out with regards to our diversity, equity, and inclusion criteria. We'll touch a bit more on that on sort of the JGDC side and a bit of the diversity we have in our team, but that's for a later slide. And then our focus of today is really JJDC, which is the group I'm in. Next year will be our 50th anniversary. So we were actually the first corporate venture capital ever formed. We always like to say that we were formed around the time of the NVCA, the North Venture Capital Association, North America Venture Capital Association. And we've been around for quite some time. So we started off as a not fully strategic investor, and over the years we've turned to be a fully strategic investor, which means that we work hand in hand with the various J&J operating companies based on their strategies and their interests to invest in companies, technologies, assets that are of strategic interest to the J&J operating companies, in the hope of an onboarding, which means either an acquisition, an asset acquisition, a license agreement, or a distribution agreement. So there has to be a milestone or a point in time where we say, we want to own it down the road in one way or the other. And we invest across all three sectors for J&J, across all stages of companies, across all geographies. There's obviously a sweet spot to each area of interest, but we are very flexible in the amount of money we deploy, whether we lead or co-lead, whether we just join, whether we take strategic rights or not. We can create companies, we can co-create companies. So we've been very lucky to have a broad experience of people with broad domain expertise across our team. And that's been, a big selling point for us as an investor in this industry. I'd say on a normal year, we deploy anywhere between 200 to 400 million. I know this is a pretty wide spread, but some of those depend on whether we invest in public companies, how crazy the valuations are in this year. But the average is around 300 million a year across all three sectors globally. And given we invest off the J&J balance sheet, we're really an evergreen fund. So we're not a set fund of like 100 or 200 million that has a fund life of 10 years or so. And as a result of that, we have, as noted here, a pretty sizable portfolio worldwide of some investments going more than 20 years back in companies that are revenue generating and continue to disperse dividends, and some are less than 2 months old. So we've had that pleasure of dealing with all those companies. And the last bucket is our business development teams that are, mainly our late stage activities across the sectors. These folks actually sit within the sectors. So we have BD folks covering orthopedics and DePuy, and same for Ethicon, and same goes for Pharm. And those folks mainly deal on the regular day-to-day basis with license and M&A deals, but we also leverage their expertise and their connection to the stakeholders within the organization to support the investments and the collaborations that we do and help advocate for them as well. Knowing what the business is looking for from a strategic perspective, as well as any drafting of milestones and things that they would want to see in the course of that relationship. And as I said, we're very global. So any colorful point you see here on the world map is a place where there is either a JJDC person, a JLab site, an innovation center, or an incubator / accelerator that we're associated with or sponsoring of. So you'll see there's a sizable presence in Europe, 2 points here in Israel, which is our JJDC office, as well as the FutureX incubator, which we are partners in. And then quite a lot of areas in Asia, including Japan, Korea, China, Singapore, and stateside, plenty of sites on the East Coast, which is where our headquarters is, but also you'll see Texas and California and Australia, of course. So we have geographical jurisdiction, for lack of a better term. So if there would be an Israeli opportunity getting to me, I would forward that to my Israeli colleagues. And if there was a West Coast opportunity, they would forward it to me, and vice versa. And then I think that the real secret sauce here is that we're all very interconnected. So if there's something that is too early for JJDC, we can flag it to our JLabs folks. If there's something that's too late for our innovation center or anybody else, they would flag it to us, and we could figure out who should own that discussion down the road. And our incredible president, Chris Piccarello, who's coming after more than 20 years of service to J&J, is really I have to give him a ton of credit of bringing in a lot of good process. And normally process is not something you associate with a positive connotation, but I think in the context of JGDC, Chris being a person of finance background has brought a lot of process to JGDC that helped us execute better and really run a lot of investments in a much more thoughtful way than just getting them done and hoping it works. So Chris is very committed to our vision and has helped drive that along together with leadership, and hope some of you will have the pleasure of meeting him as well. And on the point of diversity, so this is our team. Unfortunately, this is not the most updated picture. So we've had a few departures over the last few months of some retirees in that picture, and some have departed J&J in general. But as you will see, there is a very good, certainly above industry female participation in our team. So we're about 50% female in our team these days, which is something to be very proud of. Plenty of various ethnicities and backgrounds in our global team, and everybody's, as you can see, global based on the locations below. So we are a team of about 15 investors, I think, nowadays, each one with his own geographical jurisdiction, but also sector expertise. So I cover, obviously, medtech on the West Coast. I have colleagues who cover medtech on the East Coast and Israel, et cetera. So that's our team. And a bit about JGDC, because this is really why we're gathered here today. So we are the oldest one, the oldest corporate VC. And I think in VC world, being old is actually positive, because you have a lot of experience and a lot of stories to tell, and maybe a lot of lessons learned from what works and what doesn't work. And as I said, we've invested in all stages. So I've been a bit over 9 years in J&J, specifically in JGDC, and I started my way off as an analyst, so building my way up, doing a lot of the dirty work for the investments, diligence and investment memos, and transitioning to an investor role where I still do all of that, but this time it's for me and not supporting others. And I've had the pleasure of doing, company creation and investing in companies with $100,000 checks in incubator companies, but also had the pleasure of doing investments into public companies to the extent of, $100 million checks. So, a lot of us and a lot of our team has had deep expertise, not just in the various stages, but also in various mechanisms and structuring of deals. Some of us have, more domain expertise in orthopedics, some more in oncology, and we can certainly leverage our other team members to, provide a lot of background and assistance and sort of watch outs in some companies that some of us may not have that experience in. And I think that the bottom line here is we are long-term investors. Sorry. So we don't, obviously there are investments that we invest and then 1 to 2 to 3 years later the company either shuts down or gets acquired, whether it's by J&J or not. But in healthcare, specifically in pharma and med devices, a lot of the plays are long-term plays. So by no means everything we do is long-term, but a lot of it is. So you will certainly see in our portfolio a lot of PMAs on the med device side, a lot of 510K de novos, a lot of 510Ks that are not really making that product eligible for sale, but does require a lot of clinical data. And when we invest, for example, in a Series A company, we certainly ask what would be the onboarding milestone, in the sense of what has to be true for us to acquire the company. And that vision is sometimes 3 to 4 to 5 and even more years down the road. I always like to tell a story about CardiHeal, which was a chondral lesion company that provided a plug made out of corals to treat chondral lesions. And we invested in 2014, and the company received its PMA approval in 2021 and acquired by Bioventus in that year as well. So I always like to tell the story that, we follow through with the company, we continue to invest, we'll provide a lot of value, but it may not mean that J&J is buying the company next year. And I think the other point that's very important to mention here is even through the course of the pandemic, we continue to invest, we continue to be very active, we continue to provide a lot of value, even with challenging conditions on travel and participation physically in meetings. We very quickly pivoted to doing things virtually. We kept investing in companies, those that were in the midst of a fundraise, those that had hardships, we continued to support regardless of stage and financial situations, as long as it was still strategic. So I think that that's important to know, that we are long-term partners. And even when an investment could potentially sometimes transition to be a non-strategic investment, whether it is the company that's pivoted or is it J&J strategy that's pivoted, we try to be as responsible and capable to invest, even if we don't deem the company to be strategic, as long as there is a good potential financial return in that company. Christine, I saw you pop in. I'm assuming there's a good question.
Can we take on some of the question, because I think it might
Please.
Please. Can you expand on a medtech that falls within strategic fit for J&J?
Okay, so there's a few slides on sort of areas of interest down the road that we will cover, and I'll try and cover those fairly high level, just to not too much into specifics, but we'll cover that in a few later slides.
Okay, maybe we should wait until the next round then.
Yeah. Okay. So this was actually in our 2021 newsletter. Some of you who are interested, you can sign up on our website. The new newsletter is supposed to come in like first week of January, I want to say. But the numbers for 2021 were pretty consistent with the years before that. So we are, I think, consistently considered to be the #1 healthcare corporate venture. This is probably the third or fourth year in a row, I think. Our average of investments about $300 million. We've done 49 investments in that year, some follow on, some new. Over 21, we had 7 onboarding, so 7 assets that were either acquired as companies into J&J or assets acquired or licensed into J&J, and a total of 13 exits from our portfolio, which I'd say is pretty good. And that is a number from last year. I think today it's about 180, give or take. So we've invested in a bit more companies, and some have come off our portfolio. So quite a sizable activity on a regular basis. And these are, some testimonials of CEOs of companies that we have invested with over the past few years. One is Q, which some of you have known has received a lot of very positive PR in the context of COVID, of providing, at-home diagnostics for COVID and flu and others. And I think what will be very apparent from reading a lot of those, and the same goes for GI Windows, which is actually a more recent investment on the medtech side, is we are very value driven in the sense that we don't just put money and sit on the board. We try to provide a lot of value to those companies by providing guidance on clinical trials and providing, in some cases, access to data or access to IP if that's relevant for our needs and the company's needs, and connection to industry and connection to providers and insurers, and doing some voice of customers and KOLs. So we try to be very active in the companies that we invest in, and really drive value, not just by putting money, but also sort of providing our expertise in those companies as well. And you'll probably see the same, and I'm not going to read those out, from Legend Biotech and Dermala, which is our consumer investment. So you'll see a very diverse portfolio across areas of interest, stages, technologies, and I think that the common denominator in a lot of those is partnering with us has helped bring a lot of value and foundations to the company to help advance it forward, whether it's by partnering with JLabs and providing a JLabs tendency to some of those companies, or partnering with the operating company and the operating company providing certain materials, certain IP, certain knowledge to help that company grow. And that's sort of the summary slide saying, we could basically invest seed to Series A, B, C, and beyond. We sometimes have invested in incubators and accelerators. And the most recent addition to our capabilities as a dedicated capability is new co-creation. So all of us investors have dabbled in creation of new companies, whether it was as spin-outs from J&J's or spin-outs from academia or other companies, but it wasn't a core focus for all of us. Now there is a dedicated group within JJDC that is predominantly focused on company creation, on looking for IP and knowledge to spin out of J&J, to spin out of academia, to spin out of other companies, to really syndicate the round, invest in that company, and really bring in management and sort of get that rolling. So high level areas of interest for J&J, and I know this was the question earlier. Pharmaceuticals. So these are our therapeutic areas. Very high level. There's a slide later on that kind of details a bit more in that. So we're in what we call CVM, cardiovascular, metabolic, and retina, immunology, infectious diseases, neuroscience, oncology, pulmonary hypertension, and then these two are sort of cross-sector activities of discovery, product development, and supply, which we call DPDS, and data science. Med device, we're going to touch a bit more in detail, and then consumer health, which we'll be spinning out, has a sort of self-care, which used to be called our OTC brands, and skin health. And here at the bottom, we really have 4 activities that are somewhat touching on all of those 3 sectors, and what we like to call as cross-sector initiatives, which is our lung cancer initiative that looks at interfering with a disease progression across diagnostics and therapeutics and follow-up as well. So both medtech, pharmaceutical, and consumer. World Without Disease, that is the aim of eliminating certain diseases by early detection and early intervention. Our health tech group, which aims to help each and every of those sectors through digital technologies. And then our global public health group, which looks at mainly underserved communities and underserved countries to help provide access to care across the world. So I'm not going to go too much detail into the pharmaceuticals because that's not the focus for today. I know most of you are medtech guys, maybe a bit here that touches some of the medtech aspects. So on the DPDS side, there's obviously a lot of the typical biotech stuff, but there is a lot of data and analytics and a bit of manufacturing and supply chain as well. So that kind of touches a bit of what the medtech folks do. And then a bit on the data science, which is mainly, digital assets, both AI and machine learning to drive various values across discovery and development, clinical trial optimization and treatments, as well as software as medical devices to enhance care to some populations. Quickly sort of skipping through that. And then on the med device side, right, I would probably characterize this as something that is cross-sector as well, across med devices, but also franchise-specific activities. So our med device businesses are comprised mainly of 4 businesses. I don't think I have a specific slide on that one. Yeah. Which are Ethicon, which are mainly general surgery things. So think about wound closure, sutures, hemostats, sealants, energy devices, so ablation of tumors and ablation of tissue as well. And our robotics group, which is a big part of that, which has recently facilitated the acquisition of Oris, as well as Verb, which is now called Otava. So these are our 2 robotics platforms that sort of falls under the Ethicon budget. And then we have our Depew group, which is our second largest group, which is predominantly focused on orthopedics. So there are units for spine, sports medicine, craniomaxillofacial, trauma, and then a bit of robotics as well, which is somewhat separate from that robotics effort on the Ethicon side, as well as digital, which coincides with anything around navigation, imaging, software, sensors that relate either to surgery or post-surgery interventions. We have our CSS group, which is Cardiovascular Specialty Solutions, which the biggest group there is Biosense Webster, which is the market leader in electrophysiology, as well as Acclarent that teaches that deals with ENT and neurovascular under the Cerenovus brand, and Mentor, which deals with a lot of aesthetic medicine. And the latest group is J&J Vision, which is comprised of 2 main groups: surgical vision, which is all the capital equipment in the ophthalmology suite, so anything around cataract and refractive surgery, so big heavy machines. And then our contact lens group, which is the J&J Vision contact lenses, which I assume a lot of you know. And then on the left-hand side, there are a lot of sort of themes that you would see sometimes across all of those franchises, which is advanced imaging and visualization, biomaterials, digital technologies, tissue regeneration, robotics, and 3D printing that are somewhat relevant to a lot of those franchises I've talked to earlier. You want to stop here for questions, Christine, because I know there were a lot of questions around.
Yeah, let's do that. First question. Before even asking for investment, is there a way to get reality check from J&J thought leader, more like a mentoring session?
Sure. So, I mean, my approach, and I think it's a philosophy really, not just pertaining to J&J in general, is asking the question doesn't hurt and it doesn't cost you anything, right? So I would much rather folks give me a heads up saying, hey, I have this technology, I have this idea. What do you think? And I'm Israeli, so I'm very blunt. We don't sugarcoat things, and we could say, no, it's a shitty idea, or it will never work, but obviously don't take offense into that. But I'm very, very happy to receive ideas, receive projects and say, this is very early. We'd like to see animal data. We'd like to see human data before we consider an investment. Or I could say, let me forward that to my R&D colleagues, and they could say if they're interested in doing an R&D collaboration or to support this experiment, and say, if you reach a critical milestone or critical results that then convinces us that this is working, whatever the product technology is, then we can figure something out with regards to an investment. I'd say on the medtech side, it's probably I don't want to call it a bias, but it's almost characterized as a bias, is we normally invest fairly late. So normally around large animal study being read out, or first in man data, is where we sort of feel the technology is somewhat de-risked enough for us to invest. It obviously varies from, a digital product to a robotic product to a PMA product that's, class 3 implantable high-risk device. Have we veered from that every once in a while? Yeah. So if you look at, I'll just, work with the power of examples, right? So I've mentioned CardiHeal earlier. When we invested in CardiHeal in 2014, they had 120 patients data, 1 year follow-up, which is pretty late. And this is what we needed to be convinced to invest. In OrthoSpin, which we'll cover at the end of it, in Israel, which we acquired last year, this was a robotic fixation system. So we invested before they did a single human, but they were very close to do so. In Orthotaxy, which we acquired in 2018 and invested earlier in 2017, we invested when they were only in cadaver studies. So there has to be a level of validation of the technology and de-risking that gets us comfortable with investing. But I think what I hope, or I want to think we're doing fairly well, is communicate to entrepreneurs and companies what we would like to see to believe if it's too early. So I would encourage everybody to reach out and provide ideas, as long as they're strategic, right? If it's not strategic, it will be a quick no. But yeah.
Okay, great. Next question. Because you answered another question that was there already. Perfect. Of the portfolio companies that are acquired in MedTech, what percentage are acquired by J&J versus others?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And we've done some of that analysis, and we normally, don't share those numbers per se, right? I think the way you should look at it is fairly different to percentage, because of the size of the portfolio. Even the big J&J cannot be acquiring 20, 30, 40 companies out of its portfolio. And I don't think, honestly, we acquire 20 to 30 companies a year across all J&J, regardless of portfolio, because acquiring companies takes a lot of diligence, a lot of work, and P&L is it's a limited resource, right? So if you compare us to other big med tech players who don't invest as much, like Boston Scientific. So let's take Boston Scientific as an example. They have a portfolio of like 6 to 8 companies, give or take. That's it. They invest predominantly later stage, so in companies that are near commercial or already commercial, and they buy, I'd say, 50 to 75% of them. And when they invest, they take very hard strategic rights. So by the time they invest, the likelihood of an acquisition is very high. We don't operate that way. I think for us, investment is not only a tool used to acquire companies at the end of the road. It's also a tool to enable access to a technology. So I'll give an example of a company called MedCrypt, which we've just invested. We've done a small convertible note, but we've invested publicly this year. But we've invested together with Intuitive, right? And Intuitive is a competitor of ours, but we've invested to facilitate a relationship with a cybersecurity provider to J&J, and bringing in a capability by virtue of a commercial agreement that we don't have internally. So the investment was really a facilitator of the relationship, but by no means we are going to acquire the company. So I think for us, equity is a tool, not necessarily the only way to get access to companies and bring them into J&J. And therefore, the statistics on that are somewhat different than a Boston Scientific or a Medtronic or an Edwards. I will say that the initial aim when we invest in most of the companies is to bring them into J&J, whether by buying them or buying the asset or licensing it. So we onboard across all three sectors, maybe 2 to 7 a year, depending on what the onboarding looks like and what the companies are and sectors. I've had one this year, which was great. And I had one last year. So I hope to continue that success, but it varies. There isn't like a dedicated number that I say, we aim to have every year as a KPI, or, we have to have a minimum of, but we all aim to have onboardings. That's really the method of success.
Okay. Look, along the way, you answered 3 questions there. One, this particular one is that you mentioned all the clinical areas that you're interested, that area of interest. Is there within that therapeutic areas, is there certain technology that you're most interested in?
Yeah, so I don't want to go too much into details, and some of the very specific areas of interest are obviously confidential. I think a lot of what I've provided here is certainly general enough. If folks have a specific technology that they think J&J may be interested in, I'm happy to sort of check quickly. I can say, for example, just to give an example out of Ethicon, for example. So we used to have a pretty big women's health franchise under Ethicon, and there was a big class action lawsuit a few years ago around vaginal meshes that kind of made us leave that business. So, for example, in women's health, and Ethicon will probably not be active in the next few years, if not at all. There are core areas. So if you look at sort of the areas we are playing in and look at the product portfolio that we have, I'd say being around those areas, and all of these are public, you can find the product portfolio and SKUs on the websites of J&J. These are all areas that we're going to be playing in. So implants on spine, trauma, anchors, sutures, things like that. This is always going to be a focus for us. And adjacencies as well. So things that are, selling to the same call point, that add another tool to the toolbox, that could provide value both to the patient, to the surgeon, to the hospital. These are all going to be of interest. Whether we invest or not, that's a different story, but these are all areas we're looking into. So I just don't want to go too much into details across, 50 franchises. So
yeah. Next question is what are the top 3 to 5 things that are most critical when you do your due diligence and your potential investment?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So there are a lot of lessons learned over the years on this one, for sure. And things that may have been very important at the beginning are taking a lower priority nowadays versus others. So I'd certainly say team, which is not a surprise to anybody who's ever spoken to venture capital. And I think at least the team, whether it's the founding team or the management team, is really important. And the reason is, at the end of the day, the governance of a company is really the board and its management. And not all boards are created equal, and not all investors are created equal. And I think having a senior seasoned management that listens to some of the criticism from the board is very important. So I think team is probably number one. And obviously you can complement some gaps by bringing in new people or bringing in, independent directors or consultants and things like that. But I think making sure that there isn't like a red flag on the team is probably the number one thing that we've learned over the years that, is important to look into diligence. The other part of it is really financial planning and really having a plan B really from the get-go. And this is probably even a stronger statement to be made today with, the economy going, pardon my French, to shit. And, fundraising has not been easy. It hasn't been easy since the beginning of this year in the days of COVID, but even more so since, May or June of this year, where a lot of VCs are basically keeping a lot of the dry powder for existing portfolio companies. Deployment of cash is becoming slower, harder, and smaller, to be honest. So I think a lot of that is really important, finding out that you have a plan B and sometimes even a plan C of what happens if you're planning to fundraise at the end of 23 and by Q3 you have no leads for a term sheet? Do you ask for an internal round? Do you do a convertible note? Do you do venture debt? I think planning for that is really important, and trying to challenge a lot of the assumptions in the budget is probably the second thing we look into. The third part, and that is sort of coming at it from a potential acquirer perspective, is really freedom to operate, which I think is important. We do this in almost every company we look into: software, medtech, farm, consumer. That is really important because at the end of the day, a company may have IP granted, but that may be potentially infringing of some other company's IP. But the likelihood of them being sued if it's a small startup is low. When J&J buys that IP, people are going to run after J&J and go to litigation forever. So I think these are probably the top three, and there are obviously other things that are not less important, like legal agreements and operations plan and regulatory and clinical and everything. These are all equally important, but I think those three are really deal breakers that if they don't have a green light on, we will not do the investment, right? So and obviously there's valuation and stuff. I'm putting that aside, but that these are sort of the three things in diligence that I'd say are key to know about.
So, which I think we briefly talked about it before we opened the webinar. Is there in any case where J&J did not put the follow-on investment that has created question for other potential investor or even acquirer?
Yeah. So, we are a strategic investor, and a lot of companies and entrepreneurs want us to invest because they see us as a potential acquirer, right? And as luck would have it, or nature, or whatever we want to call it, there are some circumstances or factors that are not entirely dependent on us, and by us I mean JDDC, not J&J as a whole, or the company, right? So for example, there may be a company that we've invested in with the hope of this being a $2 to $3 to $4 billion category down the road, and lo and behold, it hasn't happened because the adoption wasn't that good by the physicians, or the reimbursement landscape has changed, or something has changed, right? So these are like one factor. The other one could be, we're a big company, and leaders change at J&J. So we could have an R&D leader who is a huge supporter of a specific domain, and he supports an investment, and 3 years in he gets promoted, leaves J&J, retires, I don't know what, and somebody comes in his place and he says, you know what, I don't like microbiome, I don't like biomaterials, I don't believe we should invest in this. And then he basically could say, you know what, I'm not supporting following on that investment. So various circumstances where the interest in a company or a category or a technology can change. And it's unfortunate, but it's sort of, how things happen in life, right? So what happens in these scenarios is I'd say one of two things. So obviously then this investment transitions from being a strategic investment to being a financial investment, right? So almost you need to look at it as if we were a regular non-strategic VC investing into that company, right? So then it becomes a financial question in the sense of what is the likelihood of an exit of that company to a third party or to IPO, and how viable that exit plan is. And we would, not us as investors sitting on the board would scrutinize that from a company perspective. The JJDC investors would scrutinize it because, any money we put in, we would be expecting to put more money in until the exit. And with no strategic sort of point in sight, that's sort of how we should think about it. So if all of this proves out to be positive, like for any other VC, we would probably continue to invest if we see a potential exit scenario down the road. If we don't believe in the team, if we don't believe in the category, if all of that change has been not because of our strategic change, but because of circumstances in the company per se, that may be a different story. But that is almost, similar to any other VC, right? If a VC invests in a company and they don't like what they saw after the investment, they may not invest. A lot of the corporate VCs get a bit more scrutiny on that side because we're an easier thing to punch at. But that's normally how these things play out.
Okay. I know we only have like 9 minutes left, and I know you have a few more slides. Do you want to go over
Yeah, let's
that?
just quickly, there isn't much left. So we've covered consumer and we've covered a lot of those cross-sector initiatives. I just wanted to share a bit of activity we've done. I've done here in a bit in Israel before I left last year. So a couple of those are from this year. So I'll cover the non-med tech first. So there was a collaboration facilitated by the IC here around influenza treatment with Sedara and then Q Health, which we were originally investors through GPH, the Global Public Health initiative, I think probably in 2018 or 2017. And then they did the IPO. So we participated in that. And part of that was a bit of the COVID activity as well. The other ones are ones that I've been active in. So there was this Australian NavBit participation with my esteemed colleague, Kathy Connell in Australia. This OrthoSpin story this is an Israeli company that was really what we call a built to buy. So we invested off this company, off Trendline's incubator in Israel, put in the full Series A, put in the full Series B, took very hard strategic rights and provided the company with a lot of IP and know-how and specs, as this is a robotic fixation system that basically sits on top of a J&J system. So they had to really get a lot of the specs and data and things from us to really build the system. It was a very successful investment, very successful story. By the time they've completed about 30 patients in Israel and in the States, we have acquired the company end of 21. So that was really my baby. So really proud of this one. Another one that we did mid of this year was Moon Surgical, which is a French California company, sort of based here in San Carlos. It's a robotic surgery system that really puts the surgeon still in the center of the OR and doesn't require him to be in a different room like a Da Vinci. Really innovative thinking about sort of the surgical theater and how to sort of keep the surgeon still the center of gravity in the OR. So we've invested there this year, and it seems to be progressing very well. They actually received 510(k) approval yesterday of their first advanced system, which is great news. And then the one on the top left there is MedCrypt, which is a cybersecurity company for medical devices that we co-invested together with Intuitive and other existing investors. And that one is a very good example of how we invest in technologies. This falls under med tech, but this is not a medical device per se. And by investing in this together with Intuitive, and hopefully we'll have one or two other medical device manufacturers join us as investors, we hope to make MedCrypt to be the industry standard for cybersecurity, especially given today the FDA has mainly guidance on that field and not a specific requirement. So, this is a good example of how we leverage equity investment to get things done, but MedCrypt is by no means a acquisition target from a company perspective. So just sort of touching a bit of those very briefly. And that's basically it. These are my contact details. So Christine, I don't know if you guys normally provide the speaker contact details. I'm more than happy to do that. This is my email. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever you need. This is not my Twitter. This is J&J Innovations Twitter, but you can find me just by searching for my name in Twitter. And yeah, I mean, feel free if there's any questions, things I can help with, mentor, guide, I'm more than happy to do so. And I'll stop sharing now just so I can see faces and questions as well. So
that's great. Well, thank you for sharing. Everybody got Tamir's email address, so that's good.
I'll put it in the chat if folks can, let me just put it in the chat. Yeah, there you go.
We have a couple more questions if
Yep.
you're open to that. What are some of the new and exciting things J&J is doing in the area of digital health and digital therapeutics?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think a lot of digital health is a pretty broad term, right? So it would be anywhere from therapeutics to EMR data to data sciences. It's a pretty broad category. So on the data sciences part, we've certainly partnered with a lot of companies, specifically on clinical trial optimization and data ownership. There were a lot of plays there. We have invested in Israel in a company called Zebra Medical Vision, which uses computer vision to analyze a lot of imaging studies and then see stuff in pictures, for lack of a better term. So, better diagnose and better see things. Our collaboration there was more on the orthopedic side with regards to implant sizing, but we've dabbled in that as well. Consumer has done a lot of digital therapeutic investments as well. So one of my portfolio companies from my Israeli days is a company called CaraCare, which deals with IBS. So it's a digital therapeutic for IBS. Reimbursed in Germany, by the way. Haven't started growth in the States yet, but there's a sizable market in Germany to attack, and they're going at that. So we've been very active across the board. I think that the common denominator across our activities in digital health, that they are not independent of business needs. So by no means we will be selling software or digital therapeutic as a standalone. It has to coincide with a product or a procedure that we are providing as J&J. That's sort of the crux of it, I'd say.
Makes sense. Question. Would you please go into more detail about the rationale and nature of the changes in venture at J&J led by the recent new leader?
You mean Chris Picciarello? Or
yeah.
Well, I mean, Chris has been around for 3 years at this point, so it's not new by any means. I mean, Chris has been a great advocate for JGDC. I think he's been helping us get in front of senior leadership and get support from senior leadership and really turn around a lot of thinking and sort of finding strategy and advocacy for things that the businesses are sometimes incapable of doing. So try and leverage us for things the businesses cannot do, which I think has been very great. And I think he's provided a lot of sort of clean process that we probably didn't have as much in the past. And, speaking from previous leaders who were previous to Chris. So I think he's been very good about, development of talent, bringing in external talent, and really trying to think outside the box. As a corporate and as a corporate VC, you were kind of locked into this framework or borders that you don't have a lot of flexibility. I think Chris has been trying to sort of push that a bit more by collaborating and working with other stakeholders that have been very good for us and for J&J in general.
Okay, great. One more question, or maybe we can sneak in two more. Companies with SBIR funding, are they particularly attractive to J&J or not really?
I don't think there's any judgment one way or another whether they got this type of funding or another. We've invested in so OrthoSpin, for example, was a company that was an incubator company, and folks, if they don't know the incubator network in Israel, they are government funded, right? So the way this works is you have to repay the government investment if the company is being taken out of Israel from an IP and manufacturing perspective. So there could be up to a 6x penalty on the money that the government invested in the company. That has not prevented us from investing or buying a company at the end of it. So, you need to take that into account when you're doing the various waterfalls and P&Ls when you're acquiring the company. But that was not a preventative measure from investing, I'd say it that way.
Okay. One last question, which I thought was really fun to talk about, is, are the good times over? And I'm thinking, like, for whom though?
Wow. Normally, if this was a broader J&J question, I'd say it's probably above my pay grade, but I don't know. I don't know what we consider the good times, right, if you know what I mean. I mean, I specifically look at 2021 and maybe the second half of 2020, where there was honestly a lot of money slushing around, and anybody, and pardon me being very direct about it, anybody who's just written AI and machine learning in his pitch got $1 million with no real value or real product. So I remember, we have a WhatsApp group of folks from Israel, that the youngsters of the industry being frustrated that some of those companies have nothing in getting funded, and others that have a ton of clinical and patient value are not getting funded. I think a lot of folks have characterized this as correction, which I think is maybe the right way to put it. Whether it's temporary or permanent, I don't know. It's certainly getting difficult to fundraise. I'll say that. These past few months, and Christine, I've worked with you on one that it's not easy to fundraise these days, even with J&J leading. So I don't know if I would characterize the previous 18 months as the good days. It's certainly going to be more stringent on funding and certainly on valuation, for sure. Companies are willing to take down rounds and flat valuations, whereas maybe a year ago they wouldn't have. So my 2 cents, my personal 2 cents is it's only going to get worse, at least for the next 6 months. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
But
there's a good time. When there's a good time for others, it's a bad time for the others.
exactly.
Just somehow play into your advantage. That's the challenge. That's all. Well, thank you so much. It's been
my pleasure.
This is so helpful, and thank you everybody for joining, and have a very happy holidays, and we'll see you in 2023.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.